I'm relatively new to Overwatch, but I still like to think I know what I'm talking about when it comes to this game. I finally broke down and bought Overwatch in the summer of 2017, just before the release of Doomfist, and just in that time, we've seen heroes get completely reworked, the addition of two of the game's strongest healers, two of its most divisive maps, and the start of the inaugural season of one of the most hyped up esports leagues that I can remember. Naturally, we as players look at all these changes as they come and consider how they affect the meta, the way the game is played at the highest levels like Grandmaster, Top 500, and the Overwatch League. After all, people of all levels of experience with the game are interested in which strategies their favorite players and teams decide to employ on any given patch. I know people who are more excited for the recent Mercy nerfs because of how much more interesting it will make watching League games than they were about how it would affect their own games on the ladder. But I feel like in this discussion there's one sizable portion of the Overwatch player base that in some ways can seem forgotten about, and while talk often centers around how the meta affects the upper levels of play, I feel like less attention is directed towards how it affects the lower tiers, specifically Platinum and below. So that's what I want to do with this video, talk about what I've seen in my own ladder games as a low gold player myself, and some similarities and differences between how low and high elo play are affected by the current meta. So before we discuss some differences in the meta, I feel like we should establish a few givens, because ultimately every game you enter on the ladder is different and there are an infinite number of variables at play, so here are a couple of things that I feel we can assume going into this discussion. I know that there are of course exceptions to all these rules, I just think they'll be helpful in making general statements about gameplay. Number 1. The average player's mechanical skills and game sense both improve as they climb in rank. This one is basically common sense. If you play roles you excel in mechanically and know how to play the game smarter than the opposing team, you will win more games and climb more quickly than if you don't. Number 2. The average player will naturally climb as they gain a more thorough understanding of the game and all of its heroes. Similarly to number 1, understanding every aspect of the way Overwatch works, how much damage per second your main hero is able to output, which heroes have good synergy with your main, and how to properly position and time your ultimates, to name a few, will help you climb faster than someone who doesn't. Number 3, Overwatch's matchmaking system is not inherently perfect, but also not inherently flawed. Circumstances like levers, throwers, and just generally bad or toxic teammates are inevitable in an online multiplayer game, and while many people have had very strong opinions on what Blizzard should do about this, and there certainly are ways to improve matchmaking, ultimately there's really only so much they can do. And finally, number 4, stacking changes team dynamics drastically, more so in low elos than high. I'm making this video largely considering solo queue, as it's easier than going through and analyzing differences for every possible stack, and also because in the future I hope to do a video looking more in depth at how stacking changes team dynamics in lower elos. So now that we've established these givens, let's use them to examine how low and high tier play vary, and in some respects how they're more similar than might be expected. Also, a quick disclaimer, as I said a minute ago, I am in low gold myself, and I actually only just recently climbed out of silver for the first time. Many of the comments and generalizations I make about low tier play apply to my own gameplay as well. I just want to make sure I don't come across as preachy or sounding like I don't think I deserve my rank, or that I should be higher because I don't make these mistakes. I do make these mistakes, quite a lot actually, and I do think that my abilities are accurately reflected in my SR. Anyway, on to my first point. I feel like it's something of a meme at this point that to this day Symmetra has a 0% pick rate in the Overwatch League, and I think that Symmetra, along with a couple of other heroes that I'm sure you can guess before I even say their names, illustrates one of the main discrepancies between high and low elos with regards to pick rates. I want to look in particular at Symmetra, Torbjorn, and Bastion. The cancer picks, as I and many other low tier players have taken to calling them. Rarely do I see anything take the wind out of my team's sails, like starting an attack round on Assault and seeing Symmetra's turrets littered all over the place, or a Bastion hiding behind Anarisa's shield with a Mercy pocket, or a Torbjorn's level 2 turret hiding in just the right place to be hard to destroy. This isn't all to say that there's no way to counter these three heroes. I play a ton of Symmetra and you don't see me constantly climbing. If these heroes had no consistent counters, why wouldn't we see them run every time on Assault or Hybrid maps? Why are they among the least picked heroes, placing close to dead last on both Overbuff and in the league in terms of pick rates? I want to refer back to point number 1 for a moment. Mechanics and game sense are better in higher elos. Symmetra, Bastion, and Torbjorn are not very mechanically demanding heroes. Oftentimes a Torbjorn will mostly sit with his turret most of the game, gunning down anyone who comes close. Symmetra's kit is almost entirely based on her ability to place her turrets in the correct places, spam her secondary fire, and keep her primary locked onto targets, and Bastion has massive damage output, but in exchange lets the player temporarily ignore movement to focus all their attention on tracking. So a problem arises for these heroes when you reach higher tiers, because while the mechanics of playing Genji, Widowmaker, or Soldier 76 for example increase drastically, the skill for these heroes kind of stagnates. Once you understand the kit, that's pretty much it. The only way to improve from there is to work on game sense, which removes the factor of mechanical skill almost entirely. So while your opponents are learning new ways to take out your turret from a distance, predict where you're going to place a teleporter, or stealthily flank around to kill you from behind, all you can really do is figure out positioning and hope your teammates can adhere to those decisions. So now that we've established that as a general rule these heroes become less viable in higher skill tiers, why are they so powerful in low elos? In large part, this can be chalked up to two factors: lower mechanical skill and less team play. When it comes to lower mechanical skill, this is the same reason we see a lot of games in low elo get carried by Tracers or Pharaohs. These are characters it takes a lot of skill to shut down consistently. Tracer is one of the smallest heroes in the game and flies around the battlefield at blinding speeds that make her very difficult to keep track of at times, while Pharah, meanwhile, is the only hero capable of sustained flight and can be difficult for even hit-scan mains in low tiers to take out, especially with a Mercy Pocket. So here's how this applies to Sim, Torb, and Bastion. Think about the last time you walked into one of Symmetra's quote-unquote death rooms. Think about how much time it takes to aim your shot properly and take out every single one of her turrets. Assuming, of course, you're on a character like Soldier 76 or McCree and not a Junkrat or a Reaper. Those turrets do 30 damage per second each, so with a total of 6, if you're squishy and you aren't getting healed, you're dead in less than a second and a half. And on top of that, when you're in the beam, your movement speed is reduced by 20%, making them all but impossible to ignore at times until they're dealt with. That time it takes to get rid of those turrets illustrates my point here perfectly. With the consistent damage per second these characters put out, they need to be killed fast and aggressively in order to be effectively countered, and without consistent performance from their opponents like we see a lot in low tiers, they can be a force to be reckoned with. The other major factor I mentioned before is team play. As I mentioned a second ago, the key to countering these low skill, high damage heroes is being aggressive and intentional about taking them out. Going back to point 3 from before, you have no idea what kind of teammates you're going to get from matchmaking, and even if one person isn't on board with focusing down the problem areas on the opposing team, that can be a real hindrance to dealing with the problem. Teamfights all over the spectrum have changed drastically lately, as recently as the Mercy nerf. Before the nerf, nearly every fight ended up coming down to which team was closer to Mercy's Valkyrie and those 2 free reses she was able to get as a result. Now they're a bit more straightforward, and while Mercy can still manage the occasional res in the middle of a fight, it's much less frequent because of its new cast time. As a result, in higher elos, players know to play much more carefully now, knowing that in most situations death is essentially permanent in a fight and their team is going to be down one for the next 20 to 30 seconds while they respawn. However, I feel like that mindset hasn't really translated to low elos in the same way. It's common knowledge even among silver and bronze that positioning plays a key role in securing wins in competitive, but knowledge of how good positioning looks in practice is less common. People in low tiers got used to a mindset of playing aggressively, chasing kills and leaving the team behind, knowing that if something went horribly wrong, Mercy would always have a resurrect if they really needed it. Now, many of us have the same mindset in a very different meta, opting to play aggressively without taking into consideration that now every lost person means a 5v6 for the next push. With regards to teamfights, I also want to examine what engagements look like in low tiers. In my experience, the average silver or gold team will keep up a push until they've lost 3 or 4 people, maybe taking down 1 or 2 of the enemy team in the process. The idea of always fighting as a team is much less prominent in low tiers, and this is good evidence for that fact. When you definitively lose a teamfight to take out 1 or 2 enemies, yes, you did manage to get a couple of picks, but at the cost of feeding a lot of your enemy's ult charges as well as losing your team a good 45 to 60 seconds continuing to fight a losing fight. The difference here between this level of play and that of those higher on the ladder is that they start to consider a fight lost after only 1 or 2 crucial picks, opting to intentionally die together or to try to escape and regroup, only to give up maybe 20 or 30 seconds to a lost fight. About a week ago when the Brigida patch went live, one of the most crucial user interface changes that I've seen implemented in my time with the game was added. Now when you check the scoreboard, the ultimate charges of your entire team are displayed underneath their hero portraits. Already, this has done wonders for my ability to assess a situation quickly and know what ults my team will have or be close to having going into the next fight. Something I'm still hoping this will help players with, in low elo especially, is managing ult economy. Knowing when to use which ults and why is something professional and top tier players seem to do effortlessly, and I've gone back and watched a ton of League games just trying to study when players use ultimates and to what effect. It seems to me that in low elo, ultimates are more considered sort of carry abilities, which are expected to get a lot of picks or to give a substantial advantage in a fight no matter what. Most Pharaohs I play with expect at least 3 or 4 kill barrages every time, or it was considered a failed ult. I've lost count of how many times I've been asked for a teleporter instead of a shield generator on second point assault, even when not in the middle of a team fight. Lots of people in these low tiers consider Widowmaker's ult almost totally useless because it does no damage and doesn't provide a substantial advantage to the team. I think this largely demonstrates a general lack of understanding of how some ultimates are intended to function. Take Moira for example. A massive beam that does both damage and healing sounds awesome, right? It is, if used properly. Moira's Coalescence does an okay 70 damage per second and a massive 140 healing per second. Is there a time and a place for a primarily DPS Coalescence in that case? Absolutely. I once nano-boosted a Moira who proceeded to get a solo team kill with her Coalescence, firing it into a 6-man Graviton Surge. But the fact that her healing so far outpaces her damage when using her ult is hard to interpret as anything but the developer straight up telling us Moira's ult is meant for healing first, damage second. And this goes largely back to my second assumption from before. Understanding things like how much contribution each ultimate is capable of helps you use it most effectively. I think what's most important to understand in low tiers with regards to ultimates is they don't have to be looked at as these quote-unquote carry abilities, and instead they should be seen as ways to make a fight more, for lack of a better term, interesting, throwing in more variables and just generally causing more chaos in order to turn a close fight in one team's favor. It's also worth briefly mentioning the notion of saving ults when a fight isn't going your way. High tier players are very smart with their ult usage, knowing which ones to engage with, which ones to use as soon as they're available, and which ones to save when they aren't needed. In low tiers it isn't as commonplace, and you see ultimates used to try and turn around a lost team fight, only to get shut down instantly because there's no support or means to follow the ult up. This is something I'm especially guilty of, actually. I'd like to start wrapping this up by reiterating that, of course, there are exceptions to all of the points I've made in this video. In some of them I like to think I'm an exception, but I also am perfectly ready to admit that in others I'm not, and I need to improve on those areas if I want to keep climbing. I've met people in my elo that are exceptions to most of these rules, but they get screwed by matchmaking or are simply lacking in one or two crucial skills that they need to really shine. I don't claim to be the most knowledgeable low gold player in the world, or one of the most skilled. I just want to be able to share a perspective that I feel is rather lacking in discussions of the Overwatch meta, via what I've learned through my own gameplay and watching that of others. The fact of the matter is that high and low skill tiers are very different in ways that surpass who has the best aim, and that's what I want to do with this channel, explore many different aspects of the game from the perspective of someone who loves this game, but doesn't have what it takes yet to be truly great. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you liked it, leave a thumbs up and comment telling me what you liked about it. If you'd like to see more content like this in the future, be sure to subscribe. And if you disliked it, don't be afraid to leave a thumbs down and tell me what you disliked about it. As a brand new YouTuber, your feedback is crucial to me, and if there's something you'd like to see more or less of in my videos, let me know in the comments and I'll be sure to take your feedback into consideration for future videos. YouTube is something I've wanted to do for a long time, and as this is my first video ever, I'd love to hear your feedback on how I can improve my content, what kind of videos I should make in the future, and what discussions you'd like to have about the game. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.